Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Avatar: The Way of Water, a movie that I never really thought was actually going to happen. Avatar was a childhood movie of mine. It was the first IMAX movie that I ever saw, one of the most transformative 3D experiences that I ever saw as a kid, and I watched it a lot. And as I grew up and I became more ingrained with film and writing and just how stories work, I kind of grew a little bit sour on the film, but not enough to ruin my enjoyment of that film. I don't think it's an amazing film. I don't love it as much as my other family members do because my family loves this first Avatar movie, but I still do enjoy it. And although I don't have the same sort of hate that some people say it's just Ferngully or it's just Dances with Wolves, because I haven't actually seen those films, so I don't have that comparison to make, I still find the movie fairly generic in terms of its story, and especially the dialogue. I think it checks every box of generic action movie lines that a character can say in a movie. And so despite all of that, I really do like the world building in that first film, and when it comes to a sequel of this film, that's what I wanted. I wanted to explore this world because I thought there was a lot of room to actually improve upon the first film. And now that I've actually seen the second movie, now that it actually is real and it exists and it wasn't delayed yet another year, I've seen the film and I can say yes, there was room to improve. I love this world and I actually do like this movie just a little bit more than that first one. It gets me excited to watch a third, fourth, and fifth one to kind of explore this world more and to actually improve on every single installment, because I do think this is a series that can improve on every installment. So we are going to be talking about spoilers for Avatar: The Way of Water, so if you have not seen this movie, which I'm sure you guys have by this point, I'm releasing this on opening day. Let's just get into this thing. I'm really excited to talk about a lot of different things because there's a lot to talk about in this film. And so what is this movie about? Well, essentially it follows Jake and Neytiri once again several years after the fact of the first film. They now have a family, they have a bunch of adoptive kids, but also a bunch of kids of their own, and so they have this whole saying that Sullies stay together. And so when the Sky People come back and Stephen Lang's character comes back for revenge against Jake Sully's character because him and humanity see him as a traitor to humanity, they want to put him to justice, so they decide to flee the forest and their tribe in the forest to be able to keep them safe, and they flee off to the water tribes across the planet. So a couple questions that I had going to this movie, and a couple questions I'm sure you guys have going to this movie as well, is how are they bringing back Stephen Lang's character, and how are they bringing back Sigourney Weaver as her new character being the teenage daughter of Jake Sully? Very interesting questions, and I think very interesting answers that this movie gives. Well, for the Stephen Lang character first, I think he is an interesting character because essentially they took his memories from the first film before he went off on that final battle and died, and they implanted it on his avatar that was growing back at home. And so now he's back with that implanted memories. He's basically the same character, but he's a little bit different because he is Na'vi now. So there's just kind of this kind of difference in his character because now he's the thing that he hated most, but now he has the strength and now he has the ability to breathe this air, to be able to do all these fantastical things and to learn the culture the same way that Jake Sully did in the first movie. Even though he is still that villain character, he's still that very macho kind of military guy that he was in the first one, but I think there's a little more nuance to his character, especially in his relationship to the character Spider in this movie. And with Sigourney Weaver's character, I feel like there's a lot of mystery surrounding this where the next film will actually get more into, but in terms of my theories for it, she was basically conceived miraculously with Grace's avatar's body. Even though Grace has died and her consciousness is no longer in her avatar still lives, essentially just without a consciousness, but she was pregnant, she gave birth to this new character that she is playing, and basically she's a new person. But is she a reincarnation of Grace through Awa? Maybe that is the whole thing. Maybe it's a very Phantom Menace type thing where Anakin was born from the Force. I honestly think it's going in that direction, which I'm very interested to see what they do with her character. And I think her character and her kind of symbiotic relationship with the world and with Awa and with all the creatures in this world is very interesting. By the end of the film, when she kind of masters all these different things, it sets up a great question of why is she able to do this and what will she be able to do in the future of this franchise. I find her character absolutely fascinating. And so the next character I want to talk about is the Spider character, because I find his relationship with Stephen Lang's character very interesting because he's actually the son of Stephen Lang's character. He was abandoned because he wasn't old enough to go back to Earth when all of them were sent back to Earth, at the end of the first film, so he was adopted by Jake Sully's family, and so now he is a part of the Na'vi. But in this film, when Jake Sully's family decides to flee to the water, he's actually left behind and he's abandoned by the Sullys, which I think is a story point that I really wish they dived more into, because to have this character growing up with the Na'vi, having this different outlook on humanity and life in general, but also being human, and having this connection now to the villain of the story being his father, I feel like they really could have had more of a tug and pull with him kind of feeling abandoned from the Sully family. So he actually does want to help, his actual father, but also his actual father is killing all these different Na'vi people, trying to, lure out Jake Sully's character. So I kind of wish there was some more kind of mental kind of struggle with this character's mind, because it never really felt like he was on the side of his father, even though he does certain things by the end of the movie that is a little bit questionable with him, and he has kind of allegiance issues. I feel like they had the idea of a good storyline with this character, they just didn't execute it as strongly as they could have. There's even a point towards the end of this movie where Neytiri's even threatening to kill Spider for Stephen Lang to set free her daughter, and so she's even threatening to kill Spider. How does Spider feel about this? Does he feel betrayed by his family? But after that, he decides to, he does to save his father's life when you think he is dead, when you think he drowns at the end of the movie. He goes back and he saves him, but then he goes back to the Sully family, and there's no real conversation between Neytiri and Spider about what she did, because she was going to kill Spider. She was going to kill Spider to save her own family, therefore saying that he's actually not her own family. And so I think there is a lot of storylines that they could have done with that character, and maybe they will in the future have some more conflict between Spider and the Sully family. But within this film itself, I never really felt that conflict within his character, which was a really big missed opportunity. And speaking of missed opportunities, let's just get over the negatives for the characters first. The whole thing with Neytiri in this movie, I will say she maybe has 10 lines in this whole 3-hour long film. She's barely in this thing. She was my favorite character in the first film, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity, because of course Zoe Saldana is a very talented actress, and even in the first film, even with the technology not being as strong with the motion capture as it is in this one, her performance in that first one still came through and was still very powerful. In this one, she has a couple moments where she was doing that, and she was a badass in the last 30 minutes of the film, but for the entire middle portion of the movie, she just wasn't present at all. But as a benefit of her not being in the rest of the movie as much, you get to spend a lot of time with the kids in this movie, especially Britton Dalton's character, who plays the younger son of Jake and Neytiri, and I loved his character. He was easily my favorite character in the movie, and honestly, as a main protagonist of this film, even more so than Jake and Neytiri and all these other characters, he was my favorite character in the franchise so far. I do think that Jake Sully's character is fine for the most part in the first one, and in this movie, he's kind of resorted to the very overprotective dad, and so his character always seemed a little bit dull to me. He wasn't always the grand hero that a lot of other people see him as. I think he's just an okay character, and I do think that Sam Worthington does a fine enough job in this role. I just never found his character as, investing as I find Britton Dalton's character in this film. And when it comes to the end of this film and their arcs of, Britton Dalton's character kind of being the son that breaks the rules, he's not the perfect kid, he's the younger brother to the older one, and he has this thing where, he feels like he's not kind of given the attention that he deserves from his father, and by the end of the film, especially when the older brother dies and that the younger son is kind of to blame for this, but his father still says that I see you, and he sees that he has value, whereas he's not, the perfect son that his other one was. He still is a great character, and he still is a great person. He loves him no matter what, and I think that that's kind of realization with Jake Sully's character and his arc in this film, and the ending with those performances from those two actors by the end of this film works really, really well, and I think that is definitely the heart of this movie. I think that is the strongest arc in this movie, is their relationship as father and son throughout the entire middle portion of the movie, and especially towards the last act of this film. But when it does come to the older brother, he's barely in the movie. I really wish that they kind of developed him more, because he is the one who dies in the final act of this film. Unfortunately, he is shot in the last minute when they're jumping down this thing, and I think in terms of a directorial and just kind of a decision for that moment, I kind of wish when he jumped over the fence, you actually saw him get shot, instead of, you thinking that they made it out alive, and you're like, oh, phew, they all made it out safely, and then in the water you say, oh, he's actually shot. I feel like that moment of tension would have just been stronger, would have had just an extra punch to it if he was shot in that moment, and I think that whole entire storyline of him dying would have also had a bigger punch to it if he was a more prominent character in this film in general, because, at the beginning of the movie, they got captured by Stephen Lang's character pretty early on, and I thought that that character was going to die right then and there at the beginning of the movie, but he didn't. He survived, and the fact that they weren't showing him much, and the fact that by the end of the movie, they were kind of, teetering it back and forth, I was kind of hoping that he would die just to have some sort of dramatic moments in this film that I can actually feel something, and when it happened, even though I didn't really care much for the character, I still felt something because of the other characters' reactions to that moment. I just feel like, again, the punches could have been stronger in this film if it gave a little more time to develop this. And this is a 3-hour movie, and I'm talking about not having enough time to develop some of these characters, which is kind of a bummer, and I don't really know where they could have taken that time from, because I feel like this movie has so much in it that it's kind of hard to take time from other things, because everything does feel important, which is a testament to the movie itself being a 3-hour film, and nothing feeling like it's out of place, nothing feeling like it's boring or, not interesting. There's always something on screen that you are invested in some sort of way, which I do think is a feat in and of itself. But the fact that I'm wanting more is also kind of a good thing, because I think in the next film, with these characters spending more time with them, especially with these kids, and learning more about them and seeing their performances grow as they get older, and just all these different things, I am very curious to see where they go with these characters in the future. But in terms of this film itself, I feel like they could have had a little bit more punch into it. But for the most part, I do think that these characters were very well introduced, and I do like them all a lot. And let's get into some of the easier things to rave about this movie, because of course, this is a James Cameron movie, so the tension and the suspense and the cinematic flair that this movie has is of course going to be grand in and of itself. It is a James Cameron sequel, so of course it's going to be better than the original one, and of course the visual effects being 13 years after the revolutionary first film, the visual effects are revolutionary in this one. I think that everything there is to be said about the VFX has already been said, but just to add on to that, I do think that it is so consistently amazing from beginning to end that it's just kind of amazing that the VFX can be that flawless throughout the entire thing, whereas, most movies you'll be like, okay, there's a shot here and there that doesn't work for me, but for this film, I don't think there's a single shot VFX-wise that didn't work for me. There's a couple weird things with the high frame rate, which I'll get into in a second, but for the most part, for the visual effects themselves, I do think it looks stunning, especially when you get to the underwater stuff, after you get past the first act of stuff being the familiarity of, what was in the first film. I do think there's some style choices with the looks of some of the human elements with the machinery and stuff like that. It feels a little bit too clean, and I think the high frame rate really does suffer when it comes to those sort of things, but once you get into the water, it is absolutely breathtaking. And when it comes to the high frame rate thing, I'm hearing a lot of people be annoyed by it, some people thinking it's awful, some people really liking it. I kind of land in more of the camp where I think it works a lot more often than it doesn't. When it comes to the first 30 minutes, there's a lot of getting used to it, because you're seeing familiar elements, this familiar world, and when it comes to the actual Na'vi stuff, I do think the high frame rates with the creatures and all that stuff works better than it does with the machinery type thing, because when it comes to the human elements and the machinery and all these mech suits and the way that these government people talk, it feels like a video game. It feels like it's written like a video game for a video game, and even though the visual effects look very, photoreal, just the fact that it's the high frame rate just makes it feel a little more video gamey. That's not to knock the VFX or anything like that. I just think that style doesn't work for this type of element, but as soon as you get under the water and you see that high frame rate used in the way that James Cameron wanted it to be used in the correct way, I think then it is absolutely stunning. So again, you see a lot of world building with this film, which is why you get to see a lot of this high frame rate. You get to see a lot of the stuff under the water, and it's just truly baffling. I really am curious to see how much stuff was practical in this film at all, for this all basically just an animated film, because some of the stuff just looks incredible, and I don't know, I can't fathom how you'd actually make this in general. So the behind the scenes stuff must be very fascinating to watch, but for the most part, I do think that this is a movie that you should see in high frame rate. I do think you should seek it out, unless you have already seen other films with high frame rate and you just hate that in general. I do think that it works mostly for this film, so I do think it's worth catching in IMAX 3D, Dolby 3D, or hell, even just regular 3D. I think the 3D elements are the best that I've seen, obviously because it was made for it. It's not kind of transitioned into it, and it is just worth it for this film. And so the last thing that I do want to talk about is the future of the Avatar franchise, and I'm very excited to see a third one, because like I said, there's a lot of mysteries left unsolved in this thing. When you have Spider go back and save his father's life at the end of this movie, I actually think that is a very earned moment, because in terms of storylines that are kind of set up for the future things, this movie does have quite a few of them, but within this film itself, all the character arcs are served for its purpose. And if Stephen Lang's character died at the end of this movie, I felt like that whole thing of him letting go of Jake Sully's daughter in order to save his own son, and then his own son going back to save him, that would all been pointless if Stephen Lang's character died at the end of this film. So the fact that he's still alive, that we can see some further character arc for his character, and maybe you can actually bring him into the Na'vi, maybe he can actually turn out to be not such a bad guy, maybe he can sacrifice himself for the Na'vi by the end of the third or fifth film, or whatever it may be. I'm glad they kept him alive for that reason. I'm very curious to see what they do with Sigourney Weaver's character, with her whole thing with Eywa, and honestly, I wouldn't mind an Avatar movie that didn't have any of the humans at all in it. There's no war, that's just them dealing with the nature of this world and dealing with the mystery of Eywa and all the kind of more mystical elements of this planet. I would really be interested in that as well. And of course, there is the whole thing with Britt and Dalton and this character that he falls in love with in this film. That relationship doesn't really get to a head in this film. It kind of is introduced that idea that they could be a couple in the future, but they don't really do anything with it in this film. So in the future, I'm curious to see where they go with those characters, because I did like Cliff Curtis. I did like Kate Winslet. I did like their children. I just wish that they had a little more to do in this film, especially in the last act of the film. They kind of just disappear for a little bit until the very, very, very end. So I'm curious to see where all those relationships go in the future, and I really hope they don't leave this water tribe right away, or maybe we do explore some other tribes, but this water area and the underwater stuff is just so good that I wouldn't mind staying here for a whole other film rather than just changing the whole setting once again. And the last line makes it seem like this is their new home, so hopefully they do stay, and hopefully we get to see more of these characters in the third film that kind of reach more of a final arc for some of these threads that are left hanging. So what did you guys think of Avatar: The Way of Water? Make sure you guys comment down below what your favorite storyline was, what you thought of the VFX, who your favorite character was, and what do you think of the whole thing with Sigourney Weaver's character being kind of conceived from either Awa or maybe that random scientist dude. I'm really curious to hear all your thoughts on all of those things. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe and check out other reviews on this channel, and also check out my top 20 movies of the year list that's going to come out later this month. I'm very excited to talk about that and just all the things that we're going to get next year as well. So thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.